everyone. Thank you so much for being here today to discuss this most serious issue of child sexual abuse and exploitation. I'm not going to say an awful lot today because we've got some really special people with us who I'm sure you'd much rather hear from. Absolutely delighted to have the brightest and the best in this fight with us to discuss this offending and what can be done about it. It's a really important conversation, but it's not an easy one. So if at any point anyone's feeling any kind of way, please feel free to take a break and come back if you wish to. We're going to be talking about both the nature of this offending, the scale of it, and the solutions. So just to give you a drop of context, our best estimate is that there are 3.1 million adults in this country who were sexually abused before the age of 16. We think that translates to about 1 in 6 children, as vast numbers never come to the attention of the authorities. That splits down to about 2/3 little girls, 1/3 little boys, and 2/3 of this abuse is taking place in the home with somebody who is a family member or feels as good as a family member to that child. Little ones with disabilities are twice as likely to be targeted. Here's the good news. This is not a problem without solutions, and we have people here who have the solutions right at their fingertips. So what we're going to do is take a few minutes of introductions from all of our panellists, and then we'll move straight to Q&A, because I'm sure you'll all have specific areas you want to touch on. So with that, we will turn to the lovely Rhiannon, and we'll work our way down this way.
Hi everybody, I'm Rhiannon. I'm a survivor of online grooming and child sexual abuse that happened when I was 13. I'm obviously now well recovered and I work for the Mary Collins Foundation. I use my experience to inform children, young people, parents and professionals about this issue to make sure that you're all aware of it from a victim and survivor perspective, and so that you understand truly what a child is experiencing. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vicki Green. I am the CEO of the Mary Collins Foundation. We are a charity that is specifically around helping victims and their families recover from online child sexual abuse. And we do that by looking at trying to encourage practitioners and families, all of us really, who are here to protect children, to understand what's happened through the lens of the child. And so we work at many different levels to ensure that comes through. My professional background is I'm a social worker, registered social worker, and have worked in this field for over 30 years. I was a child prodigy, obviously. Okay, thank you.
Sure. I'm Miriam Cates. I'm the Member of Parliament for Penistone and Stocksbridge, which is in South Yorkshire. I suppose I'm quite new to this issue in terms of learning some of the horrendous statistics and figures about the scale of this problem, but I'm a mother of 3. I used to be a teacher, and I think big picture, I think this is one of the biggest challenges that we face as a society. Is actually it threatens to destroy our society in many ways if we don't tackle it, and so I'm very interested in what government can do in a very stringent way to stop particularly the internet side of what's going on. So I'm very interested to hear what the other panellists think of as solutions.
Susie, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name's Susie Hargreaves. I'm the Chief Executive of the Internet Watch Foundation, which is a UK hotline for the reporting and removal of online child sexual abuse. Last year, we removed 153,000 web pages, which equates to millions and millions of images and videos of child sexual abuse, and we exceeded that number with 4 months to go this year. Thank you.
Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Morrison-Bell, and I work on Google's public policy team in the UK. And one of the policy areas that I work on is our approach to tackling this awful type of content and awful crime. And I want to thank Olivia for the amazing report that she did. It's unbelievably thorough, and with the CSJ for helping make that come to fruition. And I'm very happy to take questions today and talk about the kind of tools and techniques that we use at a kind of technical level, the expertise we have within the organisation, but also, and perhaps most critically, the partnerships we have with many people on this panel, because it's about everybody coming together to tackle it. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Patrick Cronin from PA Consulting, where I lead our online harms work. So PA have been working in this field since 2014, when Prime Minister David Cameron invited Baroness Joanna Shields to help make the UK the safest place for children to be online. I think it's important we remain focused on that ambition. We're also proud to be one of the founding partners of the We Protect Global Alliance. This is an alliance of over 200 members, international organisations, governments, civil society organisations and private industry, where our main contribution has been to research and publish the first 2 global threat assessments, which set out the scope and complexity of the online threats. As we just finished our 3rd edition, the 2021 edition, which will be published this month, what we're seeing is A, the extraordinary pace at which the threat is evolving online, and B, the significance of the UK's technology industry plays in helping us build a positive human future, and C, the dawning realisation that this requires an integrated, coordinated and multi-layered response. Now, despite the horror and scale of this crime, I do believe we have grounds for cautious optimism. The UK is generally world leading in our approach, but that said, we can't afford to be complacent, and we can't afford to miss this opportunity to lead the world in designing new regulation, spearheading tech innovation, and setting a benchmark for law enforcement cooperation. So I do believe that if there's political will, public support, we can turn the tide on this threat, not just in the UK, but globally, because this is a threat that doesn't respect national borders. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much for those introductions, especially Rhiannon for sharing part of her story. I know that's really tough to do, so thank you. I'm going to ask some questions first and then give you guys an opportunity to start feeding in. So the first question I have for everybody. So government has this, it's so long planned that I worked on it years ago, has long planned legislation to regulate and bring in this duty of care for user-generated content platforms and to bring in a duty of care. This is going to include a range of harms, but is prioritising CSAM, child sexual abuse material, and online facilitated abuse such as grooming. What's not in this draft bill that you guys would like to see in this draft bill? Who wants to go first? Susie, I choose you.
Okay, right. So first of all, we welcome the bill, and we think it's broadly very good. What's not in it is the detail about how it's going to actually be delivered. So whilst we're kind of working very closely with government, with industry, law enforcement, working together to make the UK a safer place to be online, we actually need to see how that pans out. And what's not in it for us is that we are dealing with an issue that's international. So, you know, everything that happens within the bill is going to impact on our ability as an organisation to remove content that is hosted internationally. And we need to ensure that we don't focus so much on a bill that's UK focused that we actually damage what can be done internationally, because we have to work internationally to fight this problem. So we want to see more detail, and we want to see how it's going to pan out, and we want to see the good stuff protected. This is an area where you're not going to be able to resolve the problem without industry and government and law enforcement and organisations like us all working together. So we want to see a kind of sensible, nuanced approach that actually recognises the good, as well as saying these are areas where we can all improve. Thank you.
Vicki, what would you really like to see in that bill that isn't there?
I would actually like to reiterate what you're saying, and particularly the bit about the complexity of how we need to be working together. And we need to be moving the focus away from children protecting themselves online. There's an awful lot of emphasis on online safety. It's not our job, it's not children's jobs to protect themselves, it's our jobs to protect them. So it is that putting an emphasis on industry to help work with us to understand how these happen, these crimes occur, but actually putting the emphasis on the detection and on trying to prevent. You know, I say we keep putting children into cages, telling them what they're not allowed to do and putting fences around them to stop them from experiencing life, to stop them from experimenting. Actually, we need to be putting the cages facing the other way to prevent people from being able to get to them. And we need to make sure that that circle around them is really there to protect them by focusing on how we can detect those that are wanting to perpetrate offences, for example, getting children to share images. Yes?
Sorry, just a member of the public. Surely that's the response.
We'll be taking questions afterwards, sir. Thank you so much. Tom, could I ask you, something that comes up very often when talking about the online safety bill is the need to avoid these perverse incentives. For example, if platforms are reporting we found 14 million indecent images of children, that looks awful, but that could be evidence of them working really hard to find images. Could you speak a bit to how we do that smart regulation from Google's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. First up, when it comes to online CSEA, we're hugely welcoming of the bill. I think it'll do two things. One, I think is really important. It'll probably bring all industry up to a certain baseline. So the larger companies, I'll give you some examples, are technologically pretty advanced on this stuff. They do quite a lot of work to make sure that technology is disseminated for free across the industry, so other platforms who may not have the same resources as a Google or a Microsoft are able to do. So I think it'll raise the baseline. I think it'll also give a degree of legal clarity that industry needs, because this is content that's illegal to view by its very nature. So it's hard for our reviewers to look at the stuff. But Susie will have this at the IWF law. You have to get special dispensations from law enforcement and lots of those things. So it'll help create the kind of processes and procedures that companies need. This is the kind of technical stuff underneath it to help. You mentioned a good point. It's a difficult one for companies to talk about. Frankly, yes, the numbers are going up. And to an extent that is because over the course of the last, what would you say, decade perhaps, the technologies have gotten more sophisticated. And the way that the system is structured is that every time a system in one of these companies detects an image, it has, well, certainly for the US companies, it has to be reported to this organization in the US. So it generates like an automatic flag. That could be 5 versions of the same image. It could be 5 new images. What you do is you have at scale these machines that are crawling and crawling for known imagery, and they do that very fast. So in a sense, when you see some platforms certainly have kind of higher numbers than others, but it does mean that they're catching more, and most of that stuff is automated, so it means that it didn't necessarily hit the service before it gets there. So I think it's done 2 things. Yes, on the one hand, it's difficult to see those numbers, but it's also the companies doing better has shed light on the scale of the problem. And just, to give you a bit of background, so you're kind of aware of how it works. On the whole, so the technology has traditionally worked around creating what's in effect like a database of known images, and then they are kind of turned into things called hashes, so they bear little kind of resemblance to an actual picture. Those then get fed into a machine. The machine can take a kind of image that it finds, scan against that database, and if it finds a match, it'll come down automatically. And that technology's been around for 15 years or so and is getting better. Google, obviously YouTube is part of Google, so the engineers at YouTube a couple of years ago took that one stage further and were able to build a technology that could look at video content, because that was a kind of technical challenge that the previous technologies were unable to do. And then what we've developed in the last couple of years is something that comes at the other side. So we're very good at automating known images and creating that database. What has been a technical challenge is to recognize new images and doing that at scale. And so a couple of years ago, Google developed something with an incredibly uncatchy name called Content Safety API. And it's effectively an API that helps to kind of grade potential images to see whether they're likely to be the type of imagery that the IWF or that Google researchers, kind of expertise and moderators might be looking for. And so that at the moment has helped increase the kind of effectiveness at finding imagery by about 7-fold. So you can do it quicker, you can find new stuff, you can categorize that, then you can go back to the first types of technology. So that's a kind of overview of what we do from a kind of technical perspective. I'll probably stop there and let somebody else talk.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you, Tom. Patrick, you've worked on this issue globally over a number of years, so it'd be great to hear from you. How has this crime changed? The reason why I ask that is because this crime doesn't exist in a time silo, so the bill needs to have sufficient flexibility in it that it can be future-proofed. That's a challenge, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think this is wider than regulation. It's wider than technology. If we sit in here thinking there's a technology solution that's a golden bullet to solve this, it doesn't exist. It's never going to exist. This a multi-layered response that a few of us have talked about. So what we're seeing globally, if you look at how the threat has evolved so rapidly over the last, not that long, 3 years. So in 2018, we exposed how technology such as the dark web was providing opportunities for offenders to gather and communicate with impunity. exploiting online safe havens and on-demand access to victims. By as little as 2019, we realised that many offenders were freely using mainstream internet services on the surface web, driven by the industrialisation of easy access, consumer-ready services that provide enhanced privacy, security, and anonymisation. And then this year, what we're really seeing is a dramatic shift in the way children are using online services, accelerated due to COVID lockdown. And Susie will be able to provide the statistics, but a huge increase in incidents of self-generated indecent imagery. And whilst it is self-generated content, the harm is very real, whether it's a result of coercion or initially consensual, but then shared against the child's wishes.
I think it's really important that you raise that self-generated CSAM, which, as you say, is on the rise. It would be great to hear from both Susie and Vicki a little bit about that. What's happening here and why?
So in about 2012, we started seeing what we thought was a new phenomenon, which is self-generated content. And basically, just to tell you what that is in really simple terms, this is children normally in their bedroom and domestic settings where they've got a laptop, a tablet, an internet connection, and they are being tricked, encouraged, groomed, coerced into sharing sexual activities of themselves. Now, where we see it is it's captured. We only see one side of the interaction. It's captured, and then we see it on child sexual abuse websites. And it's been growing and growing and growing. And in 2020, 44% of everything we removed was self-generated. And in fact, this year, it's now up to 2/3 of all the content we're removing. And 80% of the children we see in these images are girls aged 11 to 13. So we've started a campaign on that, which I can talk about later if it's useful. But what we are seeing is, we saw it increase during lockdown. So obviously when you've got children online all the time during lockdown and perpetrators online, they're kind of easy pickings to go and find these children to groom and coerce. And just to give you a sense of the gravity of what we actually see, I'll just describe to you one video because I think we've reached a point now where we actually have to say what it is we see. And one video I've seen is an hour long. It's a child we've aged at 11. She's naked in a very, very smart bedroom. She's inserting all sorts of stuff into her vagina. It's an hour long, and halfway through the video, you hear someone shout, "Dinner's ready." So, we are seeing children in what you would think were safe settings where they're clearly unsafe and they are not emotionally and physically mature enough to know what's happening. And just finally to say, self-generated covers, everything from your old-fashioned selfie that someone took at school right through to these videos. And all sorts of motivations behind why children are doing things, from real coercion and blackmail right through to they're encouraged to do it for likes.
Vicki, it would be great to hear from you also. I know the Mary Collins Foundation does beautiful work with survivors. Can you speak to what's happening with these young people?
Yes, the first thing I'd like to say is that when we're talking about images, please remember we're talking about these numbers. We're talking about blocking, fingerprinting, DNA, all the rest of it. These are images of children being sexually abused.
Yeah.
Let's not underestimate that. And we see it from the other side. And we see an example, one young person we've been working with recently, he had absolutely no idea. He's one of this 20% male. No idea what was happening to him, only 9. His parents, very savvy. All of the security filters, everything else you would think would be in there, were there. We're not talking about neglectful parents who weren't computer aware, but still managed to, through gaming, getting into a chat room, and then being able to encourage this young person. And he was doing things he didn't know were going to be sexualized. That's the other thing about the self-generated. He may think he's doing something innocent, but actually, sitting, going, ooh, ah, oh, yeah. What are they going to turn that into? Sorry for being blunt, but the impact on that family is devastating. Because as a parent, you feel, I failed, but the impact on the child, whenever I had this 9-year-old say to me, the world is a scary place. Who wants a 9-year-old to be thinking like that? So what Susie is talking about is the skill of the perpetrator in duping, and please don't underestimate it, in duping, in getting in there and manipulating. And what, for this young person, what happened, and this is only one case example, I could give you many, but this young person, what had happened was he was then being blackmailed. You know, I'm going to spread this. I know what school you go to, the usual things. And so you're saying, why do young people very often find themselves in a place that they just don't know how to get out of, and are forced to do more and more things. So I think there should be a moral outrage about this.
Absolutely.
And I think there should be a public health campaign, and I think we should be saying this cannot happen. We cannot allow this to happen. And encouraging young people to be able to come forward and speak, because the silencers are phenomenal. You know, the self-generated even brings about a complicity. They feel as if I did it, it's my fault this happened. And I engaged on this platform or in this game, so it's my fault. I sent that picture even though I was told in school not to do it. So I've done something wrong that I knew was wrong. And it doesn't take into account the age and stage of development of a young person. A young person frightened in amidst of COVID, where all the messages were very scary. And you know, the whole context was scary. So I think we should be outraged, and I think we need to work together and put young children, young people and their families central of what we're doing, and be supportive and think about recovery. We're acknowledging this is happening. We're owning up to it, which is brilliant. It is happening. We're not pretending it doesn't. So let's get more loud and shouty about it, really.
Rhiannon, you and I have had quite a few conversations about the need to remember that we're talking about a child's mindset, and young people often don't know how to get images removed from the internet. They don't know how to access support. If you could wave a magic wand, what support would you really want to see for survivors that isn't there right now? I know you have a long list.
So, firstly, I would want a situation where everybody understands what this issue is. Everybody understands that it's not the child's fault, and they understand how this has come to happen, so that children feel able to come and talk to us about it. Back when this happened to me, I'd never heard anybody really talking about it. I'd heard about stranger danger on the street. I knew not to take sweets and get into a car. I didn't know how this translated online. Because I'd never heard anybody talking about it, I didn't feel like I could go and explain to somebody, this is what's happened, this is how it happened, and I don't want it to be my fault. I thought it was my fault. I needed an adult that I could go and talk to and who would say, this is not your fault. This didn't happen because of what you did. This happened because of how a perpetrator has manipulated you. So I think that's the first thing, is that we need adults to be there for children in this way. Then we need to work on our professional response. So professionals working in this area, and that covers social workers, police, health professionals.
Teachers, Miriam.
Teachers, everybody working with children needs to have specific training on how to respond to these crimes, to these harms that young people are facing. They need to know how to respond and how not to respond in some cases. We need to work on the bigger infrastructure. I didn't have counselling for 9 years after what happened to me. I faced many failed referrals, lost letters, changed appointments. 9 years. When I turned up at my therapist's, I actually said to her, he's probably out of prison already. He served the time. I've still got a life sentence over me. And I was at a point then where I was so desperate for therapy that I actually said, I'm not letting him have any more of my life. He's already had a decade of it, almost. But no child should be in a position where they are not able to access therapy, and an appropriate therapy as well. I'm not just talking about CBT. They need real trauma-informed practice therapy, and they need that as soon as they're ready. They might not be ready immediately, but the second that they say, I need to talk to somebody, that needs to be there. There's probably many other things,
That's wonderful.
but
Thank you,
I'll
Miriam.
let somebody carry
No,
on.
that's wonderful. Miriam, talking about things that aren't in the bill that need to be in the bill, I know something that you care a lot about from a safeguarding perspective is young people's access to pornography, developmentally inappropriate content. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the issue of children being abused is just horrendous, you know, as we've all heard. But even for children who aren't actively being abused, I think for your first sexual experience to be to view porn, willingly or unwillingly, as a boy or a girl, is absolutely devastating. And what does that mean if your first introduction to sex is basically abusive? You know, this is not just catastrophic for individual children, it's actually catastrophic for society and what that means for people growing up. And I think, you know, as the rest of the panel have described, this is a crisis. And I think we like to think in this country that children have very safe lives, and we look back at previous areas where children were sent down the mines or likely to die before they were 5 from infectious diseases, or, you know, were left to wander around in unsafe conditions. But, you know, our children face that danger today. It looks different. But I think we've got to wake up and realise that this is not going to go away unless we act very, very strongly. And just, you know, it's a bit of a tenuous link, but on the mining, I've got mining communities, old mining communities in my constituency, and nobody really realised in the early 1800s that children were down the mines until there was a big accident in 1838 in a colliery in my constituency. And within just 3 years, because the whole country woke up to the complete injustice of sending children as young as 5 down the mines, the government acted very quickly and just banned children from going down the mines. I mean, 3 years is not that quick, but in government terms, it's pretty quick. And, you know, and almost to hell with the consequences of what that means for, you know, the economics and the mine owners and the communities. And I think this calls for that kind of response. I don't think we can wait for a market-led solution. I don't think we can wait for just education and schools and parents to wake up to this. I think our children are in danger now. And I think it's great that the bill has come online. I think it's brilliant that the government is calling it a flagship bill, and it's been much talked about. But I do think there are some things missing from it, and access to pornography is one of them. So in a previous Act of Parliament, the Digital Economy Act, one part was never implemented, which would have forced age verification of adult sites. We could implement that now. And it's not a perfect solution, and it's probably not future-proof, but it could save 3 years of some children accessing pornography. I think we've got to do that. The other thing in the bill is that we've got to recognise that although there are some very good mechanisms for recognising abuse and things like that, the truth is that Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp carry pornography. And children as young as 12 are legally allowed, and plenty are younger than that, don't, you know, without consent have those accounts. They are able to view pornography perfectly easily. And I personally think if a child is not allowed to view that sexualised content on TV before 9 o'clock, why should those platforms be allowed to have that kind of material on platforms where they know that 12 and 13-year-olds are using that? And now, I don't have an answer to that. I mean, that's, you know, there's a difficult technical solution, but I don't think the solutions that are in the bill that allow for some sort of vague age verification for those sites are enough. I think we need a much stricter, more stringent way of tackling this. And if that means raising age requirements for access to social media, I think we should do it. I think this is too important and too devastating to take a kind of softly approach. So I really welcome the bill, but I don't think it goes far enough. And I think actually what we need more of is people telling these stories, sharing these statistics, and we need the whole country to wake up. This is another, you know, this is a significant moment of child safety and child danger, as we've had in previous generations.
Absolutely.
If I could just add a stat to that, which is 50% of children by the age of 12 now have a social media account.
Yeah.
And 37% find it completely normal to be interacting with a complete stranger in their bedroom.
Patrick, both you and Susie have spoken about the need to work cross-border. Could you both give us a bit of a sense of where are we as a country? How do we rank? What are our challenges? What are we doing well?
We are actually ranked number 1, which is fantastic. But as I said at the beginning, we can't afford to be complacent. We're observing a growing gap between the global north and the global south. So I think there's a great opportunity for the UK to export our reference nation status, our insights, our tools, our ways of working to bridge that gap. I know we've talked a lot about the online safety bill, so I wanted to come back onto that. But what we're seeing as a consequence of the draft bill is this is actually resulting in advances in technology, especially in the UK's online safety tech industry, which is rapidly growing, whose members are specialising in developing AI tools to detect, assess, classify, remove content. And I wanted to draw the fact that Facebook have been cooperating with NECMEC, which is the organisation that Tom talked about earlier, which is the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, where they are sharing their own tools to detect and remove content. And we've also heard about Apple's intention to deploy new technologies to detect known child sexual abuse before it's uploaded to a heavily encrypted iCloud. But due to objections raised by privacy advocates, they've delayed their plans until further consultation. And I just wanted to link back into one earlier point, which was this is bad enough that a child is victimised in the first place, but it's not acceptable that children that become adults are re-victimised over and over again. And I do think it's totally within our grasp to prevent this from happening through technology. And it's, you know, this requires greater adoption of hash lists that Tom talked about, and this is the excellent work that the IWF does. So we can prevent, I believe, re-victimisation, which will be a start, but there's some great work, there's more to do from a technology angle. But what we are seeing in the UK is this is a market that's growing 35% per annum. It's rapidly growing, which is fantastic, and we are seeing some really good technology solutions coming out, but there's a lot more to do.
And when you speak to re-victimisation, you're describing where an adult survivor, images of their sexual abuse continue in circulation. Mm-hmm. Susie, could we get, because I know it's largely down to the IWF, I think the UK now hosts 0.1%?
Yeah, that's correct. So in terms of so you could have contents created in one country, it's hosted, so that's where it's sort of physically hosted on the internet in another country, and it's viewed in many, many other countries. So what we do is we look at the content, we work out where it's hosted in the world, and then we go out and we get that removed from that country, work through a hotline or through law enforcement. And we have lots of mechanisms to block it in the meantime if it's not removed. We also provide technical services to the internet industry, like the hash list we've discussed, for the internet industry to disrupt the distribution of that content. In terms of internationally, yeah, I totally agree with Patrick. We are number one, but other countries are catching up really quickly now. So we look at what's happening in Australia. The online safety bill has taken forever to come into force. And you look at what's happening in other countries. I don't think we can be complacent now and just say we're number one anymore. Mm-hmm. We have done a huge amount to lead the world, though, in creation of We Protect, which many of us have been involved in sharing our skills. You know, one of the things, we're a very fortunate country in that we're very well resourced, so it's been really important that we work with other countries who perhaps don't have the resources we have to help put infrastructure in place. So very, very strong internationally. We have great relationships with the companies. I would also say, though, that the technology that we use is one way of trying to fight this problem, but you'll never do it through technology alone. You have to have the education and awareness piece, and also the legislative piece and law enforcement action behind it. So it has to be a multi-layered approach, and it has to be international as well.
Could I just add one further point, which is we are proud that we are number one, and that stat is being revised through the Economist Impact Assessment at the moment. But the UK is the third highest consumer of live streaming of sexual abuse, and this is where it costs between $10 and $15 to watch a child being raped in the Philippines. So that's not acceptable. So whilst the stat of we host less than 0.1%,
0.1%.
but the fact is we are viewing and consuming this material, and just because we're not the ones in front of the camera or behind the camera, just because we're viewing it, that's not acceptable. It's still illegal.
Could I just add, sorry, when we're talking about these images, I know we've gone into about that these are children and this is sexual abuse in these images. I would like everybody in the room to understand what the impact of that is on the person. And I know that this was highlighted not so long ago, but there are images of me out there, and I don't know who has seen them. I walk down the street now 18 years after this happened to me and wonder if somebody I walk past has seen images of me being sexually abused as a child. I just don't know. That is sickening. It's a horrifying thing to have to experience, and it doesn't end, because we do have a lot of mechanisms to try and to get images back, but we don't know if we'll ever get them back fully. And that's an awful situation to be in. So if I can ask everybody in the room to do one thing, is to think of the most embarrassing moment that you have ever lived, to imagine that there's photographic evidence of it and that you don't know who has seen it, who knows about your deepest, darkest secret, because that's the reality of it.
Absolutely, Rhiannon, and I think that what you say brings to mind the need for these processes to be child-centric, for it to be the case that young people are able to access those pathways, they understand which button to click on. Something that you and I have talked a lot about is when you're reporting some vile something on Facebook, there isn't a specific flag for child sexual abuse material.
No.
So you can say it's violent and abusive, or it's harassment, it's targeted harassment, but you're not able to say quite explicitly.
No, most of the time you have to describe it as adult content. Now, I don't think that is adult content. It's child sexual abuse material. And there are certainly improvements that can be made in terms of the reporting and the removal process across a number of platforms. And I don't like to single out any in particular, but I think there are definitely improvements that can be made, because even when some content is reported, it stays there for too long, which is never okay, because the more people that see this, the more times that victim or survivor, the more times that they are re-traumatised and re-victimised every time that image is viewed by somebody.
Thank you. Tom, tech is very often posited as being the opposition in this fight, but as you know better than anyone, there's tremendous ability and will to do better on this. You talked to us a little bit about the Content Safety API. I know Google's done loads. It would be great to hear a little bit more about the steps you guys have taken to combat these issues.
Sure. I mean, I think one thing that I kind of noticed from the conversation is it is excellent that the UK's in the forefront, but in a sense, it's not a competitive issue. Like, everybody needs to be winning this. It's not, we're meant to be the best. And actually, that's how the industry tends to look at this. So, yeah, there is a nascent UK safety tech industry that make effectively market-based solutions to this. They're making products and they're going to sell them to technology companies who are going to be regulated. Google has used its expertise to build tools for itself and just gives them away for free. It's not interested in making money out of this. This isn't the kind of problem you should be making money out of overtly, right? And I think that's, incumbent upon a company with the type of expertise and resources that we have in the most amazing technologies you can imagine that make a search engine do all the cool stuff you've been doing throughout conference, finding where you wanted to go and eat and finding it on a map and all of those things, and diverting that to the kind of technologies that are needed to prevent this kind of material. I know we're at a different end of the spectrum, right? We're often kind of dealing with the distribution of it rather than the creation of it. But, doing the most that we can to kind of prevent that from happening. So, it goes along with, the core of it is that it is the technological aspect and making sure that that's like disseminated and given out so others can use it. There's a lot of work that happens internally, expert moderators who, look at images, assess, work with pediatricians, pretty grim stuff to try and understand how do you categorize this, how are you going to fit it within a system that can then, be rolled out in law. Again, it comes back to quite technocratic things, if you will. Sometimes for us, it's a bit, less, sometimes I think we see less of the human side because we're trying to deal with the kind of technological solutions. But I do think that the most important thing, certainly for us and for any of the companies, is that precisely because that's the perspective we have. We don't work with people along this panel. We don't, it's easy to be in your kind of technological high tower thinking that you're solving it, but you need to be hearing the stories. You need to be gathering expertise from survivors, from organisations like the IWF, and then being part of that ecosystem. It's not like everybody gives us information, we're on the side, we're the problem and we have to fix it. We're part of that ecosystem where the problem is alongside everybody else.
Can I just say something as well? You know, alongside the technology, we do, or technological solutions, we do have to be looking at capacity building within the protective circle around the children. And that's one of the things with We Protect and End Violence Against Children, that initiatives that we take seriously in terms of trying to help capacity build within other countries. So when you're talking about us being one of the leading lights, because I agree, Australia are phenomenal, we're trying to share the expertise that we have. We're certainly doing it through the Mary Collins Foundation. And you know, we are very well resourced. We are very well educated in this country. We do have good professionals. What the other countries we're talking about, where this live streaming is coming from, aren't anywhere near as equipped. So therefore, perpetrators are going to find victims in Vietnam, in the Philippines, in Africa. And it's about us trying to work, and I think we should be supported in doing this, in trying to assist professionals in those countries, the police in those countries, for example, to actually be able to detect, to actually be able to go out and do that. And because you would find that they don't even have, and I'm sure you'll attest to this, Susie, they don't even have the equipment to be able to log on to Interpol, to be able to match things against any hash lists and things. So it's a big global problem that We Protect and End Violence Against Children, with the support of the government, are trying to tackle, and we must be allowed to continue to tackle it. We must be allowed to share not just the technology, but also, as I said, the capacity building within the UK and further afield.
Thank you so much all for those comments, which were concerning and illuminating in equal measure, I think. We'll take some questions now. Perhaps we'll start with the gentleman at the back. Thank him for his patience.
Okay, I'm very sorry. Sorry, the question I want to say is I commend everything that all said and absolutely agree totally. And Google's done a very good job, but Twitter, for example, hasn't, and there's many other apps and new technologies that are coming online, and they're all financed by banks or investors, private investors, that give backing to these companies. And for example, recently OnlyFans, for example, classic case, you know, the finance behind OnlyFans was made aware of graphic child content, basically, because children, I'm sure we all know, are very savvy, probably more savvy than their parents actually, through, you know, come to the internet and bypassing security rules, etc., etc. So when the finance company said to OnlyFans that they wanted to, you know, for them to bring in regulation to stop, they sent an email to all the content providers, and then they all said, well, we're going to leave OnlyFans, we're going to move to this new created website that somebody can just do on a laptop or whatever. So it's almost an impossible fight, because there's always new technology that comes on stream if something's shut down. I'm sure, I don't know, I'm just saying that it is an impossible, it's a fight we should all win, obviously, but I don't know the answers to it. But surely finance companies, especially banks, or private investors, but especially banks, that back startup companies, technology companies, in new projects, apps, and you know, content from the internet can almost be provided from any device these days, and children all got access, like you said, in their bedrooms, doing these things, and when something goes viral, the people that view this content, they're all connected together, and then that content goes viral in that community. And you talk about removal, it's fine removing something, but if somebody's then recorded that content with another device, they can then repost it, or log it, whatever you want to call it, on another device in another secure, you know, their sort of environment that they operate in, that's hidden from mainstream, it's in a dark web, you know. So it's all, I commend Google and Apple especially. I mean, I agree with the Apple idea, but I understand there's opposition to that, obviously. But that's the way forward, in my opinion, and I'm just a member of the public that's, I have an interest in this, actually. Because another thing I want to touch on is that you can be a sex offender in Wales, I'm from Wales, but you can be a sex offender in England. There was a particularly bad sex offender in England that was, he had a million images of children he was caught with, convicted and did his 2 years in prison. Moved to Wales, but the Welsh Gwent police had no idea about his past history, and he was happily continuing his activity online.
Yeah.
And Gwent police were then made aware of him, or they caught, they have their own investigations, but they caught him, this guy doing the same, and then, but they had no idea from the English police forces that this guy had moved to, so these people need to be tracked as well.
Yeah.
They're on a sex registers index, whatever they call it, but is that a UK-wide index? I mean, is it just English only?
Thank you.
It needs to be, sorry for carrying on.
No, but to shed a little bit of light on that, I agree with you actually. There is not, the Sex Offenders Register is not a single central repository. It's individual forces holding their own sets of data. Obviously offenders move. Rhiannon and I worked on a piece recently where we talked about name change and sex offenders able to change their names by deed poll and essentially going missing. So it's really important to raise that. Any other questions? The lady in the front.
Hi, Teresa Murray. I run an abuse organisation across the country, 1VAA. So one of my fundamental issues is the fact that social services and police and judiciary have absolutely no understanding of this, and we deal with numerous cases of child sexual abuse where the safe parent is trying to protect the child, and one quite recently is about a 7-year-old who was forced by her father to undress, dance naked, kiss him with her tongue, and when we did the ABE with the police, and the police in this particular scenario were really good. It wasn't the investigating officer on that day. She described that her dad had made her bottom bleed. And because of her age, and she was quite naive, she wasn't able to actually describe which area of her bottom. She just kept on saying, my front bottom.
She wouldn't know.
But, well, we do have some children that have been taught,
Yeah.
and I've had another case where a child had actually said, my dad tried to trick me, and I knew he was not wiping my bottom, and he put his fingers in my vagina. So, and that particular girl, by the way, was forced by the family court to live with her dad and still is there because, as far as they're concerned, it was a lie. Because because paedophiles, and it doesn't matter whatever title they have, and I'll come back to the other issue as well, because there's something fundamentally close to what you're all talking about, is they will groom professionals, and there isn't the training in policing, there isn't the training in social work, and there isn't the training in the judiciary, and nobody can actually, the judges can do whatever the hell they want. There is nothing there's no governance there. But with this particular girl that was saying about the naked dancing and everything, and she drew some pictures. What she did tell us during the ABE is that Daddy had filmed it and that he sent it to his friends.
Yeah.
And I said, well, if that's the case, it's on the internet. I said, you need to find that out. They've decided to NFA it. I'm currently now working with Colin Sutton, actually, to look into the Met Police actually doing something on this. Now, I shouldn't have to spend every single week getting in touch with chief constables, police commissioners, director of children's services, and saying, to coin a phrase, you lot are absolute shit. Because you're actually conditioning children, and they are literally being silenced
Totally.
from actually disclosing. They're told, teachers are told to ignore them if they disclose any more abuse, and parents are having to take the choice of allowing contact with the abuser just so that they can give them 10 days of safety.
And this is the sort of stuff I was saying about the moral outrage. There needs to be a big one, and certainly because we deliver training to professionals, and parents. Actually, we run parents classes as well, so Google that. But they're oversubscribed at the minute. But we obviously do evaluation, and in the evaluation, it would shock you, but over 60% of multi-agency professionals say they have no idea what to do when it comes to online abuse. They've never received training in it. They don't know how to risk assess. They don't know how to intervene. That, I think, is an absolute outrage. And we have mandatory child protection training. Why isn't it included to be online? Why aren't social services being inspected in this? Why aren't the police being
Well, they're
inspected
not.
in this?
I can tell you that they have a 3-hour course in domestic abuse, and we're the experts that go in, and we have to explain to them what stalking is and what the 8 steps to murder is, and we have to explain how somebody grooms and who's sexually abusing, and we know that the sexual abuse of children is actually rife, and what happens later on, and what people really need to understand is, if you've been abused as a child, you are a target by social services to have your child removed at birth because they deem that your past is going to define who you are.
Well, that's not strictly true. It is
on the
seen as a
cases-
risk factor. In terms of in the social worker worked local authority for many years.
Yeah, I
but,
understand the threshold, but we have them orchestrating that, and we have got the evidence of that. I've got over 300 cases that I've worked on over the last 5.5 years. I have the evidence of true failings.
Oh,
and
there's definitely failings. I'm not
but
disputing
fundamentally,
that.
all of these cases, and you know, it disappoints me because I've seen some amazing social workers that walk because they will no longer work for the organisation because they had been told, shut up, we're doing it.
I think some of it is, you know, and again, I've worked with some good social workers, good police officers, great teachers, etc. I think it's actually more about the capacity to take on anything more. And, you know, I actually think social services are failing, not because of bad social work, but actually because they don't have the funding, they don't have the staff, they don't have the capacity. And it's all high threshold work, and you get burnout. And you get burnout at a really big rate. So what happens is you've only got an inexperienced and young workforce. We need to be supporting these frontline professionals better.
They need an awful lot better training as well.
They do, absolutely.
So we're slightly running out of time, so let's keep our questions nice and snappy.
Sorry.
Sam.
I'll try and keep mine brief. Victoria spoke a little bit about, in the beginning, about shifting the narrative away from children protect themselves. I know as a teenager myself, we still have a long way to go from this. Just share a tiny, really short bit of my personal experience. I remember sitting in an assembly in my secondary school and being lectured on uniform code after a member of the public wrote in to say that our skirts were too short and our shirts were too see-through. This was obviously treated as though we were doing something wrong. Similarly, I remember a social worker in my local area, my own social worker, saying that if you were physically abused, why were there no bruises? And this sort of mindset, this toxic mindset that treats children as though they are the problem, means that young people simply don't feel comfortable in coming forward in the cases where they're being abused. And I was wondering from Victoria and Miriam, specifically with Miriam's experience as a teacher, how is it that you would want to see this mindset change to ensure that children feel safe and feel protected in an environment where they can speak out about their abuse and come forward for support?
Okay. Well, I think that is a really, really good question. And obviously, you know, if children spoke out the moment that the abuse started, then, you know, we'd be a long way to solving this problem, wouldn't we? But the fact is, they're children. They're in the care of an adult. We teach them rightly to trust those adults. And so I think it's very difficult, and I think this is why, as other members of the panel said, we have to shift the onus away from children essentially being taught to protect themselves onto adults to not abuse children in the first place, obviously, but also to catch it. And I think this is why you know, the more I think about this issue, the more I think we need a very draconian approach to it. Because, for example, we do not allow children to drive cars until they're 17, because it doesn't matter how much you educate a 12-year-old or how much you tell them, well, red light means stop, watch out for a pedestrian. They are not developmentally able to drive a car safely. And I don't think a 12-year-old is developmentally able to use the internet safely. I mean, quite honestly, I just don't think they are. And certainly a 6-year-old is not developmentally able to distinguish an adult who they trust is abusing them and to know what to do. I think that is an expectation that is far too high of our children. Of course we should educate them. You know, schools have a big role to play. If 1 in 6 children are sexual abuse survivors, that means in a class of 30, you've probably got 5 children who've experienced it. So of course we need to educate teachers and school staff and school counsellors and, you know, and social workers. Of course we need to do that, but we need to shift the mindset from what do children need to do to report it to what laws do we need to pass to stop it happening in the first place. I think, you know, it is an adult's problem. We've got to solve it as adults.
I think we also need to start believing children. And I think there's something about us not viewing children as being midi-adults, taking into account the child development stuff. And when young people, with internet abuse, invariably we discover their abuse through the films, the pictures, the whatever, and the child hasn't got to a place where they're ready to tell us. And you know that takes a weight off the children. But by the same token, if a child does tell an adult something that's going on, no matter what type of abuse it is, if a child does tell an adult, that's a leap of faith. And we need to listen. Children will lie to get out of trouble, not into it. And as soon as we start as soon as they start telling on their dad, their mum, their uncle, their aunt, whatever, as soon as they start telling, they know they're in a heap of trouble. And that's where we need to change the mindset, is start believing our children.
Thanks, Vicky. I think the lady in the tartan dress had a question.
There's 2 points. So I'm a newly elected councillor for Suffolk County Council, and I'm a survivor, so I think I've got a invested interest, I guess. Ofsted released a report on sexual harassment in schools, and my first response was, as a new councillor, is, okay, what training are we going to get for sexual harassment? What are we going to do? What's our response for the schools that we've got in our division? And there doesn't appear to be much compulsory training for councillors in this particular area, and that became quite a shock to me. It's not high up on the agenda. So the first sort of question is, what support is there for councils and councillors to make sure that this is part of the, not just on a national picture, but also on a local level as well for training? My second point is, given that the reason we've got this content is because there's a demand for it, why aren't people who are watching this content treated as if they are the person creating the content? Because the sentences are always suspended, well, it feels like it, suspended sentences, and then they can go on their merry way. They should be treated as the person who is abusing the child themselves.
Miriam, perhaps could you answer the first part of the question? What training were you offered as a Member of Parliament, taking surgeries with vulnerable constituents?
None.
None.
Yeah, that's the honest truth. Yeah, none.
So that's clearly a public policy failing that you've identified that we really need to work on. And to the second part of your question, I've tried to be good, I can't resist. I really want to give you my opinion on this. So there is currently a huge disparity, you're quite right, between sentencing for contact offending and online facilitated offending. Online facilitated offending is treated as the kind of lesser cousin. We know that the trauma impact on young people is close to identical. So that distinction is totally arbitrary. One thing that I am utterly convinced by is there's a group of amazing survivors in Canada called the Phoenix 11 who together have written a community impact statement which is read pre-sentencing, and the point of that is to really get the survivor's experience through. When you have a contact offence, very often you have a little person whose testimony will be delivered, we hope, through a video link. The grown-ups around that little person will share what the impact of it was on them. We don't often have that with online offences because very often it's a catalogue of images. We don't even know who these children are. So I've been trying to convince the MOJ to do a similar exercise that the Canadians have done, put together a victim impact statement, people's putting pen to paper, what was the net impact of this on our lives, to remind judges these are real children having their lives destroyed. Anyone else? I'm not a panellist.
I think a lot of what we talked about is the response to the crime, whereas we need to move the response further upstream into prevention. And it will, if we can actively prevent this, having a strong law enforcement and social society support is absolutely essential. But if we want a truly sustainable strategy, we need to actively be preventing the abuse before it's actually happened. So I think that's where we need to focus.
And I think that's about, as well, detecting the perpetrators. And your point is, if you hear about technology companies talking about detecting if a child is about to upload a suspect picture. Well, actually, can we detect whenever somebody's sitting watching something? And start targeting that?
There's also, sorry, I just wanted to highlight that there are some very good programs out there for perpetrators, people that are concerned about their own behaviours. And I think that we need to be putting more money, more resources into that side of things. Where are these people supposed to go and get help? What are we supposed to do with them? Do we put them in big shipping containers and drop them into the sea? No. We need to do something with them. And if we want to tackle this problem, that's where we need to be looking, not at children, but at the perpetrators, and then secondary, the tech companies and professionals and things like that around it, but it's perpetrators. So let's start with, you know, Stop It Now are doing some great work, Circles are doing great work. Let's have more of that.
Yeah, can I?
We're out of time, Susie. I'm so sorry. I'm being texted to told that we've got to get a wiggle on. Thank you so much. That was such a powerful discussion. Thank you so much to all of our participants and for you guys for coming along. I know it's not an easy subject. Now, I have to do a little plug here. My old boss, Sajid Javid, who cares about this issue enormously and is a great champion for all of these people in Parliament, is about to give a speech over in Alexandra B in the Midland, I'm told. It'll be very good. His spads will have helped him with a fantastic speech. So we'd recommend you all to join us there. At half past, you've got stacks of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.